Barajali people. We recognise the importance and ongoing place that all Indigenous people hold in our community. So, Adrian, over to you. As I say, with your questions, please type them into the chat. Depending on what the question is, I'll either hold them to the end or interrupt Adrian if it's timely. And yeah, we'll take it from there. Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks, Chris, for the very kind words and introduction. Yeah, so my background is pretty heavily in the ag tech, and I've been messing around with these technologies for a while. So I'll step through what's in the report and the outcomes of finding through this presentation. I also just want to note that the report, Chris, it's on the Wimmera Southern Mallee website. So if it's more detail in there, and it goes into quite a bit more of the results as well, if anyone's interested in looking at them. So when Wimmera Southern Mallee asked me to come on and do this report for them, hang on, are we changing? Oh, very good. Everyone you can see that all right, Chris and Beth? Excellent. This was the question that they framed to me. So it was like, what is the impact of the high voltage transmission lines from energy projects on the performing of telecommunications and the global the GNSS system, the global navigation satellite system that is one of the stock standard ag tech features that are used on the farm. I'll also address now that we didn't test some of the variable rate technology and things like that. The reason why we didn't test them was because they all run off the GNSS system. So if the GNSS system wasn't affected, it's highly unlikely that any of the variable rate technology used by the croppers and that will be highly affected as well. So that was the question. So how we went about trying to answer this question was we did some testing. So what I did was I jumped in the ute with a Trimble CFX 750 with an AG15 receiver and a John Deere 4240 Green Star screen with the 600 receiver. I could have tested some, and I freely admit we probably needed to test other equipment as well, but that were the equipment that I was allowed to steal from my brother let me take from the farm at the time to do the testing. So I pulled them off our own gear and then ran around the countryside doing it. So the equipment was set up on a tripod at a height of 1.5 meters. The reason why I was set at 1.5 meters was after talking to a few people, it was suggested that I probably shouldn't be using my own self to lift the equipment within too close in case for safety and all the rest of it. So we went 1.5. So I set that height using tape measures and everything. And the readings were collected directly below the power line. So I classified literally how I went about it was I looked directly up, positioned it like in this photo directly underneath power lines at 0 meters. Then I took another reading at 25 meters and then another reading at 50 meters from the initial reading site. All readings were collected on public roads and publicly accessible sites. And the test locations and the sites were determined by what side of the road the vehicle was when I parked on arriving at the site, and the direction of the 25 to 50 meter test points were all in the direction that the vehicle was heading at the time. Distances were measured with a 30 meter measuring tape and marked with surveyor paint. They're probably still there because I don't think there's been a lot of rain in some of these areas since, if anyone wants to go back and replicate it. And the GNS systems were powered on and left in place for 10 minutes, at which point, after 10 minutes mark, I would take the H-dot and the P-dot was recorded. So I'll go into what H-dot and P-dot readings are. They stand for horizontal dilution of precision and the position dilution of precision. And I'll go why I didn't take the V-dot or the T-dot readings either, because I didn't think they were relevant to the outcome of this. I also tested the mobile phone network at each site. So basically what I did for that was I literally used this phone here, which is an iPhone SE, and I used the Ookla speed test app. So I was just looking at the download and uploading speed of it, and I'll go through those results shortly. The site locations are listed here below. I saw some more from the AMO website. And sites were picked basically due to where I think I could access easily the voltage of that power line. So majority we tested 500 kVA sites, excuse me, but that also ranged down to the 132 kVA sites as well. I also picked them on areas where I thought I could probably get decent mobile phone service, but unfortunately at site 2, there was no mobile phone service at all, so I couldn't do the mobile phone testing there. So these were the results from the GNSS. So as you can see here, they're all the different readings at the sites. It's listed on the screen where we tested them and all the rest of it. And some of these sites were in Victoria and New South Wales. And what we need to understand about those results is actually what we're measuring. So we're measuring a DOP rating, which stands for the dilution of precision. So it's just a quantified measure of an accuracy of a GNSS receiver based on the configuration of the satellites that it's picking up at the time. Rule of thumb and takeaway message for that is the smaller the DOP rating, the better the accuracy of the of the machine using it. Oh, excuse me. So the technique that I settled on for this paper was using position of dilution of precision, as it's a better indication after talking to many GNSS technicians from John Deere, Case and Ag Leader. It's a better indicator of if an auto steer will be affected, and that's the main technology that farmers were concerned about. Was making sure that their tractors and everything would still steer straight effectively underneath the machine. So the reason why we went for PDOP, so the position of dilution, is it's a 3D positioning measure. So it looks at the horizontal and the vertical and places you in real time. It requires at least 5 satellites to get to that level, and the more satellites you have, obviously, through the trilateration process, the more accurate the accuracy it is. I also did look at the HDOP, which are published in the paper, but they're not in this presentation. And that was just to assess if there was a horizontal drift. So this would be, even if GNS didn't drop out, that we would see like drift of the equipment based off dilution of the horizontal accuracy. So as you can see from this, and rule of thumb, because to keep in mind that there is many reasons why auto steer can drop out, but rule of thumb is the fact that if you get a PDOP reading of above 2, auto steer potentially could fail and drop out. But saying that, auto steer can fail for many other reasons due to like path interference, firmware, hardware, all sorts of stuff. So rule of thumb is if we hit the 2 mark, we're at risk of it dropping out. As you can see from these results, the John Deere, which is a newer system, never got above the 2. So it's highly unlikely, in my opinion, that the John Deere system would have dropped off. Whereas the older system like the Trimble CFX 750, it did get some readings basically at most 500 kVA sites above the 2. But saying that, and I'll go through this more in the conclusions, saying that, I still think it was highly unlikely that it would dropped off, because you got to remember that these readings were taken stationary and not rolling. So the machine did have an effect, would not have been subjected to the same level of effect of it. I can't tell from these results either, and I'll go through this in conclusion, whether it was the electromagnetic interference or whether it was path bounce effect. So what happens is the signals can bounce off infrastructure and cause like a time delay, which causes the PDOP to increase, but once again, might not affect it. I also think from looking at these results, and although it was not tested, was that base station RTK guidance would not be affected at all either, just because it'd be getting the secondary feed in, and I talked about that in the report as well. So as we can see from the results, there was an effect, and when we get into conclusions, I'll talk about what the effect and the outcome potentially was.
Excuse me, Adrian. Just
Yeah.
go back to that last slide. If you're in the middle of a paddock with no electrical interference, what would a normal H-dot and P-dot number be? Would it be equivalent to the 50 metre is what you'd normally see, that sort of range? Is that what you'd expect in a paddock without kilometres away from the nearest electromagnetic potential interference?
Yeah, you would consistently see a trend in up and down, and I don't know if you can see my pointer on the screen at all. Probably not. But if we look at the 132 kVA, there was, no effect, and we consistently see readings similar through. Also, too, to keep in mind that PDOP is actually a combination of the horizontal and the vertical dilution of precision combined together. So the readings are consistently higher than what we'd see if we just looked at HDOP or VDOP. I agree, Chris, that what we see once we're around that 25 metres away from the infrastructure, it's a nil effect. It would be consistent to see what we out in the rest of the paddock.
Thank you.
No worries. Keep the questions coming, everyone. Mobile phone testing. I couldn't really draw any trends out of it other than the fact that I say it was 100% driven by actually the service for the whole area, or how close you are to the telecommunication network. And I know everyone in the country, like in our part of the world, is in, I'll try not to get too political, Chris, but enjoying the turning off the 3G network. It was seen significant coverage fall away, and to me that is a potential opportunity for some of this infrastructure, which I'll talk about in my recommendations. But the only conclusion I could really bring from the results from the mobile phone testing was effectively, if you wanted to upload something, you're probably better off doing it in Victoria. They seem to have better upload speeds for the day. But if you're out in the paddock and you want to watch Netflix while driving your tractor, you're probably going to get a better result in New South Wales, get less lagging. But I couldn't really draw too much from it. So I don't think the transmission lines had any effect from my testing at these 13 sites. Saying that, and I'll talk about it in the conclusions, there are some other telecommunication, like the low-powered wire area networks. I honestly don't think, from anecdotal evidence and from the research papers I read, that'll be affected, but I cannot make a conclusion there until some potential testing is done on them. But I honestly don't think there's an issue. So in conclusion, these two photos are really consistent of what I saw around my travels at all sites. It's hard to see in the photo on the left, but hopefully you can see it. You would see a slight drift generally underneath power lines from auto steer occasionally, from what I could see. Now, saying that, the drift effect off the machine could solely be just due to the fact that equipment transacts across underneath the transmission lines. How frequently, I don't know, but it's probably harder. And that drift that you see in the planning equipment there on the screen could just be from the fact that the machines hit some harder dirt and crab sideways. So it's hard to do the thing. And what I found from it was, yes, there was an effect potentially underneath, especially the 500 kVA lines at the 0 meter reading. But in the newer equipment, it was not to the level that would affect auto steer or the ag technologies. And once we got more than 25 meters away from it, it just dropped away. And at 50, it had no effect virtually. Also, too, I want to make note that the readings were taken as stationary underneath the power lines, whereas a machine operating in these paddocks would be traveling, say, slower speed would be around 7-8K. So they're going to be doing the 60 odd centimeters of things. So they're really only directly underneath the zero, at the 0 reading for a very short time. That with the new firmware and hardware in the equipment and the new shielding that we see in a lot of the new equipment that's coming out, I do not think that, although there is an effect, I do not think it will affect farmers from my testing. Also, too, want to iterate, we didn't test the variable rate stuff. and we didn't test the rolling. So that is probably another area, if we definitively wanted to put this to bed, to actually go and do some rolling testing underneath it. And I would actually think that should be done. Excuse me. So in conclusion, there was an effect, but I do not think it was greatly affected ag tech being used today. So to the recommendation piece of it, I think that it's more to do with actually fitting the transmission lines into established travel paths that utilize these technologies. So lots of farmers in these areas are now doing controlled traffic. So it's actually about strategically making sure that the transmission lines are placed in a way that will have the minimum effect on the grower if possible. So to me, that is making sure that the transmission lines transect the paddock or the controlled traffic lines or the path or direction of machinery at as close to a 90-degree angle as possible, which would limit the amount of time that the machine is underneath it. And I also think that it's important that the transmission lines maintain a straight transect across the paddock as much as possible to ensure that once the infrastructure is in place, the farmer does not have to have multiple path lines to deal with it. Also, too, I think, and it's hard to test, we'd need to go and get some, use some different type of research equipment to test it, but to actually direct if there's a potential multi-path effect of some of this equipment, and that's actually causing the effect over the electromagnetic effect, the radiation effect. But so one of my recommendations, just to minimize that, is to locate structures away from any existing, where possible, structures such as trees or sheds or anything like that, which I imagine most would be part of it anyway, just to reduce the double bounce effect that we could see off the signals coming from the satellites. And it's probable to conclude from this testing that newer GNS equipment isn't as susceptible to the effect of electromagnetic effect or the towers or the double path effect. And literally it's just because they're now pulling from multiple constellations. So it's not just GPS, but it's GLONASS, it's like the Indian, the Iris, the Chinese Wadu, like they're all pulling from multiple. So these days, instead of where we might be only getting 8 satellites 10 years ago, we're now seeing as much as 30 to potentially 40 plus satellites at a time. So the new equipment with the new receivers are definitely not as affected. So if the farmer is being affected by that and there is an issue with the transmission line, I mean, one of the steps to remedy it would be to potentially upgrade the equipment for the farmer to make sure that they're not affected. And the other one that I wanted to bring up to me is this energy infrastructure that's been rolled out all through these areas. And as I mentioned earlier, where the people in the bush are being subjected to downgrading of telecommunications, no matter what the telecommunications companies say. I personally, on our farm, cannot make calls or do anything like that now, where we used to be able to do literally 2 weeks ago before they turned the signal off. This infrastructure, if it's not affected by the telecommunications, I mean, we've got towers out there, like there's an opportunity to potentially look at using these towers or the infrastructure out in the bush to actually broaden the telecommunication network out there. So I see it as an opportunity to actually improve the telecommunication out in the farm and countrysides. Other thing is too, to definitively put this to bed, especially with the automation of the technology that's coming into the industry. So we're going to see more and more robots out in the field, is to actually go and do rolling tests with that equipment to make sure it's not affected. Because there is concerns about the automation that's coming into the industry when talking to other farmers about what happens when, you know, a robot goes rogue and hits one of these towers, God forbid. So there needs to be some testing around that. Also, too, we need to test the low-powered wide area networks just to make sure. But as I said, I do not think they will be effective, but I can't put that to bed until they're tested. Also, too, I see this rollout, and I know it's a bit political at the moment, Chris, and we'll talk politics and then we'll talk religion afterwards and get everyone really fired up. But what, tongue in cheek, people, is to me, this is actually an opportunity for energy projects and transmission projects to actually start to work with the people in these rural areas to actually start understanding the problems, like telecommunications. It's a huge issue. It actually stifles a lot of development in the bush, is the telecommunication issue. It's an opportunity for actually people to work together to actually try and address some of these concerns that people in the city have about renewable energy and consistent energy supply, but also too about addressing things about some of the livability and telecommunications that have in the bush. So there you go, Chris. There's my 10 cents at the end.
All right. Thank you for that, Adrian. As I said, if you could please put your questions into the chat, that would be appreciated. And just to get the ball rolling, you mentioned some of the robotics, which I think looks like it's getting to the point where they're starting to look like rolling it out, and where those companies are looking to, where Swarm Farms, etc., looking to roll it out, is going to be on, I suppose, how well communities are resourced and opportunities. Have you any ideas of how, I suppose, communities that, as I say, obviously impacted by transmission company decisions at the moment could potentially think about pitching something to Swarm Farm, saying, look, we're keen to know because we've got to make decisions here. Is there a way we can work together to get something tested, and what would need to be done to do that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Because it's easy to say, oh, pick us to do some testing, but what would that sort of look like, and how could a community be involved in doing that?
Well, I guarantee, well, I can't speak for Swarm Farm as a business, but Swarm Farms are actually not too far from our part of the world, and they've always been very supportive of community endeavours and will turn up to a lot of farming field days. So I imagine they'd be more than happy to test. They are a commercial business, so they probably would want some remuneration. English is my first language, Chris, believe it or not, but remuneration. I got there in the end. To do it, but effectively it would be literally just organising to take some of this tech out, get it on farm and start testing it. To me, it would not be a very expensive or very big project to get together. And saying that, I know the satellite telecommunications are coming in as well to replace some of solve these things, but they're going to be way more expensive than potentially existing infrastructure in the short term. So the other piece of that question that needs to be answered is what the value of the data is too that is coming off these technologies. So like, in full disclosure, I consult to banks and insurance industries and quite a few different other things, and that data that is coming off the agricultural production system and from these technologies such as the automation is actually getting more and more value. It's becoming a commodity. So it's opening up the potential of, insurance products that haven't been able to, like yield protection insurance. So de-risking the risk of growing a crop for a farmer or growing an animal. And it's all being based in this new form of insurance called parametrics. The greenhouse gas reporting is a huge thing as well that is really starting to come in this industry. So the ISCC is placing new requirements to sell canola and barley into the European markets. And quite often it's going to need these spatial data-driven data sets to be able to sell into those markets. So there is lots of opportunity to actually help those rural communities to increase their viability and profitability, which will actually make the whole regions grow as well by utilising this infrastructure to improve telecommunications. But to answer the initial question, yeah, it'd be literally just organising to get them together to do some testing. And there's other people out there, and there's the whole drone conversation as well around, because drones are now being used more and more for in-crop spraying due to their increased capacity and all the rest of it. And there's implications there as well, I'm as well, but I'm not going to speak on behalf of CASA.
Okay, we have a question from Matthew Vallis. I'm just going to go to him and ask him to ask his question. So Matthew, you're allowed to talk. Hopefully. Can you talk now, Matthew? Or did I kick you off? Hopefully I didn't kick him off.
No, can you hear me now?
Yep, can. Yep.
Yeah, brilliant. Cheers. Sorry. Yeah, look, it's more of a thought than a question. That idea of, getting out in the field and testing as much as possible. I'm in land access. I spend a lot of my time standing around watching other people work, and just wondering, if there'd be a way to sort of develop some of the potential testing of the technology for non-specialists to do maybe in quieter moments while they're out and about on other activities. I could easily have 4 hours of just sort of standing around on any given day while survey activities and things are taking place. What a great opportunity to possibly test some stuff on behalf of a research project or whatever, to gather a large amount of data quite quickly.
Yeah.
Both. Sorry, go, Chris.
I was going to say, Adrian, I'd be interested in your thoughts on what sort of research project you could see, and who would be the appropriate people to invest in that research project, because that's the hardest part. Is I know you're very generous with your time, Adrian, but yes, actually doing the research project does take time and resources. And any thoughts on what a sort of research project could look like that would allow people to participate?
Well, let me first add, Matthew, I relate. If you ask my brother, he reckons I'm very good at standing around watching other people work as well when I'm home on the farm. So I share your pain there. Yeah, Chris, good point. And once again, I don't know anyone else who can seem to get more out of my time than anyone else than you, Chris. So that's probably a question for you about how we utilize time more efficiently. But to address the things, so there's things like, it's definitely viable to actually just have a simple, depending on what network, to set up some simple pass-through stations to a fixed location through a low-powered wide area network. That would be a great thing to do. The Telstra testing phone coverage, well, I can tell you right now, quite a few state farming organisations would be interested if we went around and started testing coverage maps for telecommunications, because we could use that potentially to lobby to get some more towers and infrastructure in place. But effectively, Chris, you've hit the nail on the head. It's about actually finding people who can potentially fund this research, because, Matthew, I know it's probably a sunken cost for you to be there anyway, but we need to be able to fund if we were to go and test GNS or a rolling test rig or something like that, like, it's very viable. We could just set it up because imagine you're driving around in a ute, set up some testing things, and you could just do multiple passes at different speeds to actually record the dilution of precision ranges as you went. But it's finding someone who's prepared to fund the purchase of 20 grand's worth of GNS infrastructure. But saying that, there is companies out there that would lease it. And one of the problems with testing the robots, which I really don't think there will be a major issue with the robots, but it's something we need to put to bed, is the fact that you then physically got to drag trailers and stuff around to actually move that gear around to test. But I think it's a great idea, and it's actually a good way for the industry to come together, both industries to come together and put some of these issues to bed.
Yeah, and can you imagine, I'm thinking too, to be a really persuasive way to possibly say to a landholder, hey, while we're doing this, we're also going to do some of this research, so you're helping, things become clearer, and you're actually helping your neighbours and you're helping the community, and you could spin it as a really sort of collaborative, let's work together as opposed to working against each other.
Well, I'm not going to say it's spin.
Well, I think it's true as well.
But yeah, and it's like there's questions out there like that. I mean, currently I'm working on another project for the on the issue of public liability insurance as well for addressing these concerns. And one of them was brought up with me the other day, or in some of the survey questionnaires that we've done, is the fact that like the liability for access for hitting machine when technology fails. Now, I don't think that's actually a greater liability than what it is now without them or the equipment failing. But it's those type of questions that the farmers legitimately have concerns about. Is like, you know, it's going to affect the insurance premiums and things like that. The testing for that is to actually go and make sure that there is potential safeguards in place and disproving around the technology isn't going to hit that. And one of the ways we can do that is by actually just getting more data points. So I agree, Matthew. It's a good way of addressing some of these concerns that legitimately farmers have.
And Adrian, a follow-up question around the citizen science angle, which is companies and farmers working together, collecting the data. Mobile phone reception, I personally, and my view would be anyone that could see a transmission line should have very high quality mobile phone coverage for a whole number of reasons. Yeah, how could that data be collected in a way that sort of builds the case of, because the lines obviously aren't built yet, so sort of, yeah, what sort of data would need to help say, yeah, here's where here's where the signals are weak and you're lucky to be able to make a phone call. There's no way you could actually, yeah, upload stuff to the cloud or do your internet banking is probably the best thing to think of with a mobile coverage. Yeah, how do you actually collect that data and what could be done? And yeah, do you think that's something that across east coast of Australia where this transmission lines rollouts occurring is something that could help a whole lot of people understanding, or do you think the companies already understand the strengths and weaknesses of their signals?
If you look at their coverage maps, no, I don't think they do. And it's interesting that you brought up that the main concern is internet banking. Chris, you obviously have more money than I do. Just be so concerned about that when you're out in the countryside. But tongue in cheek aside, I guarantee I wouldn't be surprised if Matthew and his crew or people like that who are actually out there putting the infrastructure or planning actually would know if there's service or not, because I'm pretty sure they have families and work commitments as well that at times they'd have to drive, you know, a couple of k's to go and find phone service and then stand on the top of the hill facing west while sticking your tongue out to the left, and you might get 1 bar of coverage. So it would be very simple. Like the app I used is, because I'm not so concerned about internet banking, was a free one, Chris. So we just downloaded that, and effectively it wouldn't really be that hard to start to set up a project where effectively you could design an app that would take those results and put in a repository, or you just effectively just upload them to a you know, online or email them to a central repository, and then you just compile the results. Because the app from Ookla also has a lat and longitude, which also recorded as well. So that's why I decided to use that app. So yeah, that is probably not a bad project to actually do that we could use to I'll use Matthew's turn to put some spin on it to try and get some more coverage in the bush areas.
Yeah. All right. Trevor's got a question, so I'm going to allow Trevor to talk. And Trevor, if you want to ask your question, it's another mobile phone question, so rather than a straight line question. So over to you, Trevor.
Yes, Trevor. Well, just my question is, every time we get a message that Telstra is going to do an upgrade in our area, I'm close to the Grampians.
Yeah.
When they've finished, we've either got it hasn't improved, or most cases we've actually got less service than we had in the first place. And I just wonder if Telstra why can't they fix this up? Because this is going to have a huge effect on machinery and stuff if they don't start getting it right. This is just what I've seen around here, and I've spoke to a lot of people. And I just wonder if you have any ideas on how they can improve just a normal service.
I'm not a so thanks, Trevor. So to answer your question, I'm not a telecommunication expert. I'm a farmhand that keeps falling backwards into the ag tech sector with a few qualifications around engineering and a few things like that. So, but I'm not a telecommunication expert. I can commiserate with you because that has been my personal experience as well. And also too, one of the things, it's not only so on our farm we've actually set up, because on one of our blocks there's no way we'll get coverage at all just due to mountain terrain, similar to, like, not as big as the Grampians obviously, Trevor, but there's areas that we don't cover. So we actually invested on putting Wi-Fi hotspots backhauled into Starlink. Now I don't think that should be everyone's play, and I freely admit I mess around because that's what I geek out on, Trevor, and it was because we were part of a DPI Smart Farm project, so our significant of the cost was covered. So there is technology out there to address it, but I don't think it should be passed on to us. The other thing is too, you have to keep in mind, it's work health safety, but it's also a profitability productivity argument too that we need to raise them. So I'll touch briefly on a report done by Phil Guthrie, and I'm pretty sure Chris Souness had his fingerprints all over this too back in the day. And correct me if I get this wrong, Chris, but was it about $7 a hectare in lost profitability due to bad telecommunications? So it can be ranging from the fact that you've missed the opportunity to take advantage of when the market was high, or you had to drive down the road like for 30 minutes to get phone service, tell someone to come and pick you up, or whatever it is. So it's when you extrapolate that out across the regional footprint, and it was only focused on the Wimmera Mallee region, wasn't it, Chris?
Yep.
Yeah. So if we extrapolate that out across, like, the whole of the Australian farming footprint, like, it becomes a significant dollar equation. So, and I know this is off topic, but we need to take the argument, it's not about a population for coverage anymore, it's actually about an economic argument. So if we actually want to increase revenue, taxation, ability, all that back to the government. Now, I'm not advocating that we give more taxation to the government. Once again, I won't get political, Chris, but that changes the whole argument, Trevor. And see, this is to me is where the opportunity can like, this infrastructure could potentially help address these concerns. So when you start factoring, it's like potentially just by putting towers, say if Matthew and his team could go and start developing the maps with us to work out where we need to improve coverage, it like the flow-on effect, if you put in economic terms of that increase at $7 a hectare. And to be honest, I think the $7 a hectare is pretty light, especially since that rules report was done quite a few years ago now. When the reliance on these technologies is increasing and increasing, for example, it's affecting our ability to employ people. I know I have a friend who farms, believe it or not that far from Albury, but he cannot get workers or young workers on farm because there's no phone service. So, Trevor, I know I can't answer your question because I don't have the technical background, but I think there is a way that we could change the argument to actually make it so we get more coverage.
So almost the take home, Adrian, going back to your discussion earlier around telecommunication reception, is finding a way for people to record what the reception they've got now, because when obviously Telstra and Optus and whoever else upgrade their towers, and I use the word upgraded loosely, upgrade the towers, noticing that drop off in service, having the evidence becomes important to be able to communicate that actually you're lessening service rather than increasing service. Because if you haven't got the beforehand, it's very hard to get in a technical argument with a telecommunications engineer who will engineer you to death with their answers when you say you're getting less service. So is that a fair enough I think what you're almost advocating for and Trevor's suggesting is we've got to get better at actually articulating what service we have now, using some of this piece, and then working out a way of being able to tell the story to show that as the tower's changed, we know that either the service has been upgraded or downgraded. And it might well have been upgraded if you're within 3 Ks of the tower, but if you're 10 Ks away, it might have dropped off. And that's the nature of these different Gs, is my understanding. You lose distance over time.
Yeah, because they narrow the broadband to carry more data, but they can't push it as far. Yeah, 100%. And see, that is potentially where the farming sector and the transmission sector could work hand in glove to create those type of maps. 100%, Chris.
Yep.
More succinct than my rambling 15-minute answer that I subjected poor Trevor to.
No worries. Is there any other questions? If not, we'll just about leave it there. So I'd just like to thank all the people who've come in and listened. Also, I'd like to thank all the people who who've helped make this happen. And Adrian, thank you for your presentation and work. And I think you've sort of left us with some challenges, if we, as I say, of where we need to get to. There's more work to be done, but the specific work that you looked at is there's limited impact from transmission lines on guidance systems, but that's only a small part of where farming technology is up to, and there's probably more questions than answers still live. So ideally there needs to be more work done, because I think everyone should have the confidence that as technology changes, they can farm and utilise that technology to keep on allowing Australian farmers to increase their productivity, which they've done over a long period of time by using research and development to get ahead and stay competitive.
100%, Chris. And and I'd encourage everyone to get out there and work together to try and solve these problems.
Yep.
And on another note, everyone, happy harvest, stay safe at harvest.
No worries. All right. Thank you. And hopefully you'll get a survey as you all leave. And if you don't, it'll be emailed out to you as a registered participant. So please fill it in. And thank you all for coming along. And thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Chris, for the opportunity to work. See ya.
Thank you.